And so I started out immediately with this concept of being positive. And then over time, I realized there were other elements that I was really prioritizing. And so it became this framework that I call the PEACE framework, PEACE. And that is the sustainability has to be practical, it has to be economical, it has to be approachable, meaning positive, it has to be celebrated. Every single little step counts, and it has to be enjoyable. It's about teamwork and collaboration and joy. It can't all be so heavy and such a difficult burden to carry.
Welcome to the VIRIVERSE, Immersive Sustainability by VIRIVERSE. We are a storytelling and mentorship platform designed to support and inspire the sustainability champions of the world. This supergroup of changemakers wields circularity, art, and science to write a formula for the very best of humanity. And together, we make saving the world fun.
All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Chance, aka the designer here in the VIRIVERSE, and we are so excited to be joined today by Dr. Aurora Benton, who is founder and chief change agent of Astrapto. She also goes by the Change-maker here in the VIRIVERSE. And Astrapto exists to advance positive impact in the workplace. Her passion is to make sustainability practical and approachable for people whose main job is not sustainability, but who have a passion to improve social and environmental performance in their operations and supply chains. Aurora loves helping people realize their potential while discovering a greater purpose for good in business. She's very good at this. Her work includes creating and scaling sustainability strategies, teaching college students how to launch real green teams, and helping global organizations reduce food and materials waste. Aurora has mentored social entrepreneurs and run small business workshops for over a decade. She's been a thought leader in establishing hospitality and event industry standards and education programs for sustainability. She's currently guiding a volunteer team in the development of a supplier diversity toolkit for the events industry, which we're excited to talk a little bit about that today. Aurora, my friend, hello.
Hello.
So happy to have you with us today. And our agenda for the day is to dive into Aurora's origin story. How did she get to this point? Why does she do what she does? We're going to talk about Astrapto, of course, her courses, consulting, collaboration strategies, and more. We're also going to have a kind of larger conversation about sustainable business, how to build a strategy, value system, and then, of course, execute and make the impact we want to make on the world. And as mentioned, we're going to talk about climate justice a little bit. And for those that don't know what climate justice is, we'll define it here so people can kind of have this in the back of their mind as we carry through the conversation. So climate justice is a movement acknowledging that climate change has differing and worsened social, economic, public health, environmental, and resource impacts on lower income populations. And that's per Yale with a few iridescent tweaks. So Aurora, let's just start by learning a little bit about you, some of the personal stuff. What are you all about?
So I love that you call it the origin story, right? And it is exciting and interesting to hear all of the different ways different people, your guests on your shows, as well as, all the other speakers out there talking about sustainability and making change. Like, how do we get to where we are? What drove us to be here? And I think when you've been doing this for a long time, sometimes you lose sight of that. And one thing that I love about going through the process of the alter ego creation and our conversations is it sort of reminded me, like, wait a minute, what did get you here? And I find that that's actually a really important thing to reconnect with, so that I can sometimes remind myself, like, oh, like this is sort of the foundation and the essence of what got me to this place. And so for me, my journey in this started in probably the sort of mid to late 90s. I was, I come from a Christian faith background. And so, kind of throughout my life, go to church a little here and there. And I noticed that the concept of service was always about, like, work in the nursery, go to Africa and paint an orphanage. It was all this great service stuff. But for me, I was like, I don't like kids. I don't want to be around kids. I don't like, my jam is business. I am good at business. If you've ever done Clifton Strengths Finder, my number one strength is strategy. I am good at business. And so they're like, well, what about people like me? What am I supposed to do to serve the world with my talents in business? And so I started reading about and hearing this concept of business as mission, that business can be a mission-oriented and a purpose-oriented thing. And I loved that. And so just over the years, I further explored, like, what does that mean? What does it mean to redirect capital and investment into social enterprise? What does it mean to use your business skills to advance good things and positive things and purposeful things? And that just sort of took, different routes throughout the years, and you get introduced to new things. And for me, the social side of things were my initial drive. And so about 10 years ago, I was involved in helping launch a social enterprise incubator in Chicago. I started teaching sustainability and social impact, and been mentoring entrepreneurs for a long time. And then in 2016, I really started to embrace the environmental side. And I studied and learned and got all kinds of credentials and certifications and just dove right into that. And it really sort of like filled in the full picture for me. And I realized that these are two sides of the same coin, and you really can't overly focus on one versus the other, which we'll come back to when we talk about climate justice more. So that's sort of the full circle, how I ended up where I'm at.
Amazing. Especially this idea of the social side of sustainability. I think so many of us get lost in this, we got to save the planet kind of mindset and mentality, which I'm all about that too. Of course, I'm the ultimate hippie who likes to sleep in the woods, but I think the only way we're going to really reach the masses and make the change and build this sustainable world that we want to is if we realize and recognize this is a human thing, right? This is about building a better human experience, really important. So I love your mindset, and it comes through in your work. All right, Aurora, let's build your sustainability alter ego. So you were one of the early kind of VIRIVERSE change makers to join this movement with us, and you are known as the change maker. So let's break that down a little bit, and then we'll dig into Astrapto and kind of carry on through the conversation. But a couple of fun questions first. So your favorite animal and why you have chosen.
Yeah, so this one stumped me for a while, because I'm like, well, I just got dogs, so I love dogs. I've always had cats. I love cats. I'm like, but that's not really, the essence of what, this alter ego is about. And then I realized, actually, there is a particular animal that really speaks to me when it comes to again, this goes back to my faith and believing in the idea of intelligent design, but also believing in science and evolution, and that these two things can coexist. A lot of people don't necessarily think that. I do believe that. And so the birds of paradise are this, when I see them, when I see videos of them, I think, wow, what a sweet gift from an intelligent designer. I mean, watch the way these things dance and mate and build their little area. I mean, just, they're crazy, right? And part of the reason they do what they do is also a species evolving over time to adapt to its environment. And so I think these things can coexist. And I thought that the birds of paradise, sometimes for me, if I'm feeling down, a little video of them is almost like a flower from God. Like, I made this sweet little thing for you to enjoy, to bring a smile to your face. And also the study of it from a scientific perspective just opens up all kinds of understanding of biodiversity and species and habitats. And I think that these things coexisting is really important for me, at least from my perspective. And I think that the bird of paradise is a great manifestation of that.
They are the show stealer during like Planet Earth or Life documentaries. You see them doing their dance. If anybody hasn't watched them, Google it. It's worth a look.
Yes.
All right. So yeah, let's weave in a question here while we're doing this so we don't forget. So Sarah in the audience has actually asked, you mentioned certification that you got early in your career. What certifications do you recommend?
So for me, on the environmental side, this is, again, this is 5 years ago, a little over 5 years ago, that I was starting to really pursue all these pieces. The first one I did was I got a lead green associate. I didn't and in fact, most of the certifications I've gotten, I've not maintained. They serve their purpose for me to learn, but they don't necessarily open doors for clients. So I didn't really do the credential maintenance. So I will kind of caveat it with that. But I found the lead green associate study process and exam to be really the perfect primer for sort of all things built environment. I had spent the early part of my career in software. And then I went into finance and then into education. So I've always lived in sort of the virtual space. I had not really had much involvement in the built space. In fact, I was, doing work from home, virtual work in the 90s, right? So I think that was super helpful for me to really understand the built environment. The other thing is that it just so happened I was a volunteer with the International Society of Sustainability Professionals right at the time that they were releasing their new credential. And I was part of the education committee that helped actually write the study guide for the Sustainability Associate, the first level. And there's a glossary of 300 terms. So not only did I help build and organize that, I also studied that and took that exam. And I find that's a really good all around one. What I really like about that one is that organization is trying to create an across industry, across the board, across profession standard for the knowledge and skills required by sustainability professionals. So I think that's a good one. I think I was one of the first, maybe like 1,000 people in the world to have the entry level one. So that was cool. The other credential that I got was, I did the Global Sustainable Tourism Council. It's not a credential, it's just a certificate. Just like the Sustainable Event Professional Certificate by the Events Industry Council. I did that one, of course, then I also taught it and developed the online version of that. Again, not a credential, but a really great certificate. And then I did a certificate, and actually this is I think it might actually be a credential. There's an organization called the Sustainable Furnishings Council. Now their audience is people like home decorators, people who predominantly are home residential focused. And I learned so much about supply chains and chemicals and all of the materials that are used to make furniture. So it took what I had learned from lead to the next level because it was all about furnishings. And that was actually really fascinating. So those are just a few that I pursued at the time.
Awesome. Wealth of knowledge, Aurora. Aurora was also heavily involved in the redevelopment of the Events Industry Council Sustainable Event Standards. So if you're in the events industry, which some of you in the audience are, because that's where Aurora and I come from by trade a little bit, that's another great certification to check out as well. And it's more for the supplier and the event trade shows themselves than it is an individual person. But to Aurora's point, as she said earlier, sometimes it's not so much about like getting the certification and keeping it. It's sometimes just about learning it and going through and exploring the different things that a sustainable event or a sustainable venue or a sustainable food and beverage provider might need to do, right? It just helps people learn. And as we know, certifications can be really, really detail oriented. So you can learn a lot by just exploring and going through them too. And then, of course, you might be able to share them and inspire somebody who is in a position to certify themselves and just keep spreading the word. So good stuff. All right, Aurora, we're going to test you now. We're going to swing back to our immersive sustainability fluffy stuff. So your favorite nature element. and why you
Oh my
chose.
goodness,
I love this
I
one.
love
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
So my nature element is called Cythurium, and it is the sound of wind through the leaves of a tree, or also I like the fluttering of sunlight through the leaves. And what I love about this is, first of all, it is just such a calming sound. And I love the fact that different trees have different sounds. When I lived in Florida, it was the sound of like big palm leaves. And in Georgia, sometimes it's the pine trees, which make more of this sort of little feathery, lighter sound. And then you've got like, oaks or maples or leafy kind of trees that make a sound. So I just love the different sounds of that. I love the breeze. But what it really means to me is when you think about the concept of change, change is something you don't necessarily see coming. Like the wind, you can't see the wind. But then suddenly, like last night I was over at my parents and my dogs were out in the backyard, and I happened to look out and noticed that the tree limbs were suddenly whipping around a little faster. And I asked my dad, I was like, can you check if there's a storm coming? Because it was just the sudden whipping of the leaves, right? Like you don't necessarily see it until it's affected something else. And I think change is that way, is it sometimes can feel like it's never going to come, or it's not really there, that your efforts, I know that I feel this a lot, that my efforts aren't mattering, that my efforts, that nobody, like, does anybody even read my content? Does anybody even care about, like, does anybody even listen to the podcast I've been on? So it can be easy to feel like those things that they don't exist, that they're not real. But then when you see the effect of it, right? So you can't see the wind, but you can see ripples on a lake. You can see wind, you can see leaves blowing in the trees. And that is like the reward, right? That you patiently wait, and sometimes it's subtle change, but still very, very beautiful. And sometimes it's sudden or drastic, like the whole limbs whipping around yesterday that I saw in my parents' backyard. So to me, that Cythurium element is very related to change, because you often just have to trust that what you're doing is present, is out there, is creating an energy, it's creating a flow, and you may not be able to see it, but as long as you keep putting that energy and that flow out, it will move the leaves on the trees. It will move the hearts of the people that you're talking to. It will move the policies in organizations. It will create change.
We're getting philosophical here, and I challenged you. We were going to swing back to the fluffy stuff. I think she did all right here. Wow. Something else I would add to, there's a lot of sustainability champions out there joining us today, or, listening to it later, that can really relate to this. And I think sometimes it's also like you're in a really good place of flow and you feel like you're making all kinds of impact and change. And you're like, why don't other people care as much as I do sometimes, right? Especially when we think about the masses and we think about the everyday average sort of person. And we're like, why don't they care as much as, and I think we underestimate just how much is happening that we don't see. So I love this as a really wonderful analogy for change and sustainable development and all that good stuff. So wow. Okay. All right, well, we got to go to the third piece of the alter ego character, and this is the final piece. What is your sustainability beacon? And the beacon is something that inspires you to do this work every day, right? It can be a quote, a role model, a book you read, a life experience you've had, somebody that you love. It can be kind of anything that motivates you to take action on building a sustainable world. What is your beacon?
Well, I think part of it is what I said earlier about just my origin story of realizing that my talent and gift in business could actually be used for good and for purpose. But I think that the beacon for me recently has, and over the last couple of years, that's starting to really crystallize and refine around this idea that I believe so much in the idea of sustainability being something that everybody can participate in. and that it can be something we democratize across organizations, and that it's not just the role of the elite and highly educated or super passionate, even, that everybody can and should be given the opportunity to experience dignity in their work, and sustainability and purpose is one way to do that. So I think that's one of those answers that might change on any given day. It's supposed to be the one thing, but I think that maybe it's expressed slightly differently, depending on kind of what maybe what my hot topic is. But I think that does tie back to the whole idea of mission, a mission-oriented or purpose-oriented business mindset, in that I'm not trying to do it for some specific shareholder to generate a financial return. I'm trying to do it for the good of everyone. And the employee staff element of that, everyone, is a really strong driver for me.
I think what Aurora has really been successful at doing is helping people make purposeful work a competitive advantage, a fulfilling action, a good for business, program, whatever it might be, but just really helping people feel empowered to add just that extra little layer of sustainable purpose into their work. And it's really powerful. So, well, on that note, that's a good segue into Astrapto. So before we do that, just for anybody in the audience that wants to have one of these alter ego characters, the researcher is going to pop a link into the chat. We really, really enjoy building these for people. And it's a really nice thing to be able to look at and serve it as its own kind of beacon to remind you that you are the change maker you're trying to be. And if you're ever down and unsure about your impact on the world, it's a good reminder, because we will all hit that point at some point along the journey too. All right, so Astrapto, tell us a little bit more about it, about your mission, the programs, and kind of your just general approach. You've talked to that a little bit, but let's dive into the details of Astrapto a little bit more.
Sure. So Astrapto means to illuminate, and my mission is shedding light on social and environmental issues, so raising awareness, but also on practical approaches to addressing those issues. I have, in the last year, formulated this framework because I started, when I first got into this, when I first started Astrapto 5 years ago, one of the things that I really noticed that really annoyed me, and I decided very early that I had to be a different kind of voice, is I was starting to follow and connect with a lot of people who are in the sustainability space on LinkedIn. And what I noticed is a lot of negativity and a lot of blaming and shaming. And ironically, that can be a little bit of my default, right? I'm a person with an edge. So I can like cut down and criticize with the best of them. But immediately that struck me as, who wants to listen to this? No one, like, you realize the people whose minds you're trying to change are not receptive to this tone, to these words. What do these things even mean? And you're trying, like, it was just like, I feel like I was kind of standing on the outside of, like, does nobody else see like how this doesn't make any sense? So I really made a conscious choice, and I knew that it had to be an intentional conscious choice, because my default, and I do struggle with this sometimes, is to do that, blame and shame. We're like, well, that company, blah, 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 that person, blah, 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 well, that's not exactly the way to attract those people into a conversation, much less convince them to change their behavior. I do think there might be a time and place sometimes for the blame and shame, but I think that it invites an echo chamber. And I decided early on that I wanted to be very different from that. My brand had to be different. And so I started out immediately with this concept of being positive. And then over time, I realized there were other elements that I was really prioritizing. And so it became this framework that I call the PEACE framework, PEACE. And that is, the sustainability has to be practical, it has to be economical, it has to be approachable, meaning positive, it has to be celebrated. Every single little step counts, and it has to be enjoyable. It's about teamwork and collaboration and joy. It can't all be so heavy and such a difficult burden to carry. And so that culture and mentality has sort of woven its way into all of the content and my talks and my courses. And so that's what I do. I do a lot of training. I was doing a lot of face-to-face training before COVID. But before I even started Astrapto, my prior career was in higher education, and I developed online programs. So fortunately, I already had a really strong skill set in online learning. So when COVID happened, which sort of decimated the majority of like my income, I started shifting to building more online courses. I already had some, but I was starting to redo them, up my game and the quality. And then I also do coaching. I believe accountability has to be a big part of that. And I think that personal interaction is what really kind of spurs people to take knowledge and turn it into action. And of course, consulting projects as well, like project management, strategic direction, operational details, et cetera. That's sort of all my wheelhouse.
So really quick before I forget, for anyone that is interested in one of Aurora's courses, and we'll dig into one and talk a little bit more specifically here in a moment, but you can get access to our discount code, because we have a code if you access our link tree, which is tr.ee/viridescent, and sign up for our email experience. We will respond with your code so that you can purchase green team courses, sustainable procurement. And I think that's the one I want to dig into and talk a little bit more about. But before we do, I want to back up to something that you said, talking about your approach of kind of illuminating and shining a light on the positive side of sustainability and really trying to create that really good energy that gets people on the boat, so to speak, I suppose. What are some of your defense mechanisms when the kind of negative thoughts, the frustrations pop up, right? Because anybody that does, do-gooding, change-making, sustainability work, you're going to hit that wall at some point where you're just going to be frustrated. It's going to happen. And any human hits those kinds of walls. So I'd be curious, Aurora, what are some of your defense mechanisms or things you do to kind of remind yourself that, like, no, there's a reason why this isn't moving as quickly, or there's a reason why people aren't quite getting it or buying into it? What are some of your defense mechanisms?
So I think first and foremost is I am a person of authenticity and integrity. And if I'm saying one thing and doing something else, it irritates me. Like, I can't stand when I see that in other people, and I can't stand when I see it in myself. I catch it in myself, and it bothers me. So I think part of it is I need congruency in my character. And if I'm going to have congruency in my character, I have to practice what I preach. So some of it is if I'm out there telling others you need to have empathy for those who think a certain way and feel a certain way and expect things a certain way, I have to sometimes like step back and be like, how empathetic were you when you got onto your mom for not bringing her reusable grocery bags to the store? Are you practicing what you preach? Because you know what I mean? Like, I think it comes down to little things like that, because, like building muscles, sometimes you have to build those little muscles you aren't even aware that are there, but they're the ones that prevent you from having like injured backs and, sore feet or whatever, right? So I think sometimes it's about, again, empathy does not come naturally to me, but I preach it so much that it's like, it has to be a muscle that I intentionally exercise. So that I think is part of it, just, trying to recenter myself on that, trying to put myself in the shoes of the person that I'm trying to inspire to change those around them, and think, well, how hard must this be for them, right? That's, I think that's a big part of it. Maybe also when I'm listening to other people, if I'm listening to webinars or whatever, I'm always in learning mode and sort of self-evaluation mode. So I'll hear somebody say something and I'll be like, oh, wait a minute, let me test myself on that. So I think that's another piece, is just trying to be exposed to different thoughts and different approaches and different people who are experts. That's also helpful, I think. And
I really,
also, I watch a lot of sitcoms. I'll just put it right
Gravity.
out there. That's my weakness. I eat a lot of chocolate and watch a lot of sitcoms. No, seriously, I try to watch like documentaries and things like that on sustainability and learning. But I'll tell you, when I'm ready to shut it off at the end of the day, I just veg out on I just watch just mindless TV. And it does help like shut down, I think. And sometimes you just have to turn it off, or else you can literally drive yourself crazy.
Yeah, I personally have a kind of a goofy sports radio podcast that I listen to kind of every day to help me disconnect and wind down, because yeah, I'm guilty of going down the rabbit hole too much sometimes, right? You know, it's really interesting talking about, you know, kind of defense mechanisms. I actually had an experience recently that really helped me shape a new perspective when I look at people's kind of circumstances and why they might not be able to live a more sustainable life or build a more sustainable business. I was at my mom's house for a week, and she like had gotten like a recycling container all set up and stuff for while I was there. And I knew that she had like just put it there, right? And I had this thought, I'm like, she only recycles like when I'm here. And for a moment I was kind of like, oh, that's frustrating. But then I was like, yeah, but my mom is like nearing retirement. She works a lot. She has a garden. She's got a puppy, which cool. And all these things. And I was like, you know what? It's really nice that she would go out of her way to do that for me, right? And I just think about like, if we could all be as compassionate and empathetic as we would be for our mom, maybe we'd be more patient with everybody, because a little bit of those actions every couple of months even is better than where we often are, right? And it's not perfect. It's not going to change the world all the time or, you know, in every way we need, but it is just good to have these reminders that people are human, they have busy lives, and we shouldn't get so frustrated, because our job is to go at it every day and do our thing and just try to reach people along the way, right? So good stuff.
Yeah.
All right. So we've been at this about a half an hour, which is kind of our timestamp to take a quick mindful minute. So on the other end, Aurora, I'd love to dig in and talk a little bit about your sustainable procurement course, and we'll maybe roll in a little bit of the climate justice conversation as we get into that. But first, let's go sit in Glacier National Park for a minute. We'll see you on the other side. Okay, welcome back. So, you know, Zoom fatigue, it's a real thing, right? It's good to just take a minute, take a few breaths, enjoy the sounds of nature. I know for me, there's nothing more peaceful than a creek running. And I think Sarah, AKA the Green Girl in our audience, her nature element is a babbling brook. So I put that in there for you today. So thank you for being here. Okay, before we jump back in, I want to steal a quote from the amazing Donna Rogers in our audience. So she says, Aurora, we love your authentic leadership. Approaching folks where they are is so important in making change. And couldn't have said it better myself, honestly. So good stuff. Thank you, Donna.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, Aurora. So tell us a little bit about your courses, and we can kind of dig into the procurement course more specifically. And as we do, I'd love to weave in a little bit around climate justice. So for those that are joining us a little bit late, a reminder of what climate justice is. It is a movement that's acknowledging basically that climate change has differing/worsened effects in social, economic, public health, environment, their resources and access to resources for lower income populations, and also sometimes just based on where you live, right? There's just a lot of different ways people are getting impacted by climate change right now. And the reason I want to weave that in is when we talk about how we build procurement strategies and identify our supply chain partners and choose our vendors. And, you know, certainly like in the events industry, we go to destinations all over the world and have an opportunity to work with so many different local suppliers in all these places. But do we, right? So would just be curious a little bit about your perspective on that. But let's talk about your course or courses, anything you want to mention. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. So originally my the first course I developed came from working with several hotels on sustainability initiatives and quickly realizing a couple of key things. One, hotels don't have budget for expensive consultants to come in and do all the work, right? So that was that was 5 years ago when things were, you know, good. Two, I wasn't personally interested in becoming a full-time hotel salesperson where I had to knock on 1 million hotel doors trying to sell my services, right? Like I knew enough about myself. I mean, I had mentored entrepreneurs for a long time, and I understood the importance of knowing what my own strengths and weaknesses are. And I knew that was not going to be a successful formula. But the most important thing I realized is like, it was almost like they don't really need me. I mean, yeah, they need me a little bit, but what they need is a little structure, a little guidance, a little nudge, a little confidence. They already had, like, I would go around and talk to all these people, and it's like, they see it every day. They know their communities, they know their buildings, they know the closets, they know where the garbage cans are, they know who's recycling and who refuses to. They know all this. They don't need me to come in and assess what they already know and give them some sort of grand roadmap. Now that is, I'm not trying to invalidate that kind of service, because I do that kind of service. And sometimes you really do need to do that. You need an outsider perspective. But a lot of hotels, especially mid-scale, smaller hotels, they don't have the budget for that. And so I was like, well, if I keep seeing these same things over and over again, what if I just built like a template? And all they had to do was kind of follow the template. I was like, well, the template's really a green team. And what's fascinating about green teams is, despite popular belief, they're actually not that popular. You know, there's a lot of places I go in, most places that I go into, most like hotel venues or stores or whatever, there's no green team. And so what I also started to understand was that because I was mostly starting this in a hotel context, it's since broadened out to 20 different industries. People have taken the green team course from all over. But it started out with hotels, and I was like, well, you know, Marriott and Hilton and Hyatt and all, like, they all have these great corporate programs, but I'm not always seeing this stuff that happen on the ground. When I go into these properties, I'm not seeing these programs at play. And so it was like, oh, well, really, the green team is the on the ground manifestation and implementation of a corporate program. Should be, right? So I created this green team course. And a friend of mine who at the time worked at Wyndham and was also an adjunct professor at FIU, she saw it. She was like, this is fantastic. We've got to get this in. You know, she was trying to get it in Wyndham at the time, but she did get it FIU to agree to run it as an elective course. So it ran 5 times in 2018 and 2019 as an elective course, and about 120 college students started green teams out of that course. Wow. And so I relaunched the course, and again, not just with hotels. They worked in hotels and restaurants and stores and construction companies and event venues and churches, even campus clubs. I mean, it was like all kinds of different scenarios where people started green teams. And it was just so cool to see that the formula worked. And so I relaunched the course a few months ago with just better quality and more content, and got to give it a fresh look and everything, because it was going on 4 years old at that point. And so that's a really exciting thing that just sort of really, I made me think like, wow, this really works. But then I realized, this same course that 120 students have successfully used has been used by like 5 industry people. Why won't more industry people sign up for this? Well, part of that is a sales and marketing problem that is, that's a separate conversation. For a
We
separate time.
might get there.
But-
Entrepreneurs know it well. We might just go there.
But part of it is, and I mean, admittedly, there was probably some confidence, like me feeling like, oh, but I'm not good enough. You know, some of that imposter syndrome, a bunch of that kind of stuff. We can talk about that another time. But you know, some of it was I realized that the great thing about it wasn't that college students offered some sort of special magical thing. It was that they were accountable for a grade, so they did the steps. They worked the system, and the system works, right? Like they work the system, and it's like a diet. If you work the system works. But most people drop out of the system and don't want to work the system. And so now I'm kind of in this place where I'm really trying to figure out a strategy where I can entice people to join a coaching program, a group, like get 12 to 15 people together who want to do this, but they're kind of like, oh, I don't have time, I don't know. If they meet together and do this together and work the system will work. I can prove the system works, but I know that it doesn't work very well when people are just kind of doing it on their own. Some have done it, some industry people have done it and had good success. But I think that it really is going to require more of this accountability. So the procurement course, I know that was the one you really asked about.
So,
I wanted to kind of tell the genesis of the
before
we
go there, though, you've raised some interesting questions, and we have another question from the audience. Before we go there, though, because I don't want to forget, I owe Aurora just an amazing debt of gratitude, because in my early journey as a sustainability champion, I wasn't even really a champion yet. I was just aspiring to be one someday, I suppose. I'm probably still there, I suppose, in some ways. But she reached out because we had built a really ambitious, robust green team committee out of Salt Lake for 5 of the hospitality organizations connected to the Salt Palace Convention Center. And she reached out with what we had done around some of the EIC sustainable event certifications and some of that work, and featured us in the course. And I remember—
and you're still there. You're in the new one too.
I know. Yeah.
Put all that in there.
It's very cool. And it's very exciting for me to look back and think about the journey that we went on because of our green team journey, because it all did really start with a committee. We had like 35 people on this committee across 5 organizations. And it went from this like little but big committee feeling like it was us against the world in a small city in the trade show industry and all that. And it just transformed everything. And we eventually became one of the most sustainable trade show destinations in the world. And so what Aurora's saying is,
in that interview, you were just in the process of getting the guys to pull all the carpet tiles off of the boards for what eventually became Monumental Maddie. I mean, right?
Yeah, I will. I'll try to put that up as a visual. That's true, actually. So that was a really cool thing we did, where we took leftover trade show carpet samples that were from a flooring show, and we had a local artist in Salt Lake upcycle it into an amazing mosaic of a woman named Martha Hughes Cannon, who was a pioneer back in the early Mormon settler who pioneered and championed public health. And she actually ran for Utah State Senate against her husband, and she beat the bastard. So I would say, yeah. And it actually lives on the walls of the convention center now. It's a very cool kind of visual for what sustainability means. So I'll get that up on screen here at some point so people can take a look. Okay.
That was amazing. I'm going to pipe in and just say that I was at Sustainable Brands Conference, and I didn't know you, and I was sitting in the audience, and they showed that amazing mosaic of carpet, and I was like, are you kidding me right now? I mean, that thing is unbelievable. The story is unbelievable.
It is.
So just congratulations. It's crazy.
Yeah, I was so happy I actually got to see it in person when it was being mounted that week. It's great.
We're talking to legacy people here.
Yeah.
Anyhow, I will be.
No, Donna, I love it. I've been accused of talking too much, and all I have to do is just walk people and show them Monumental Maddie and say, this is what sustainability means. They're like, oh, right after me talking for 10 minutes. So,
but creativity too. It took a very creative mind to think of that.
Yeah, yeah. I would say that Maddie was actually very much at the root of this kind of VIRIVERSE formula we have, which is circularity, art, and science. And that is it right there. It's really showing a good model. So we'll show it here in a minute. Okay. Question from Sarah, kind of going back a little bit, and then we'll segue back over to the procurement piece. How do you overcome imposter syndrome? What is your approach?
Ooh, I feel
Tricky
like,
formula.
Sarah, I feel like you and I need to have a long Zoom call and just dive into that. I think, I do think it's worth addressing a little bit here, because I do believe that all sustainability champions feel a little bit like this. So let me just say, I'm not going to answer the question as much from my personal journey perspective, although again, Sarah, I do invite you to let's connect and talk more about that. But I think what I find, so I recently, oh my gosh, that's so cool. So very cool. So I recently had, this is a great kind of one example. This is a conversation that I had with somebody recently, but I've had this same conversation with a lot of people. This person was signing up for the Green Team course, and we were talking about, like, she was thinking about maybe a career change. She was kind of in a job she'd been in a little bit, and she's interested in sustainability. I was like, well, tell me about this job. She'd been in the events industry, but because of COVID, she was now kind of in this other role. And so I was like, tell me a little bit about, like your role and everything. And I said, do you think that sustainability, because I asked her like kind of what was going on with sustainability in her organization, and she didn't really know a lot. And so I said, what do you think sustainability is something that you're not allowed to touch in your organization? And her eyes got big. And I was like, you think that it's the job of someone over there and you're not allowed to be part of it? You need special permission or some kind of special role to even think about being part of sustainability. And she said, yeah. And I said, that's how everyone feels. That's how everyone in every organization feels. And that, I think a lot of that is about that imposter syndrome. Like, I'm not good enough. I remember, here's another great example. I was on a Facebook group for like traveling, girls that travel or something like that. And I saw somebody post about how can you be more sustainable when you travel? And somebody had written in the comments, I'm working on my master's degree in sustainability. I'll be able to answer this once I graduate. Something to that effect. I'm paraphrasing. And I was like, Google. You just have to Google. You don't need a master's degree to Google sustainable travel. And that is, I was like, wow, that is the perfect example of someone feeling like I'm never going to be. And this is part of my Astrapto founding story. When I was working for a higher education company that was a for-profit. I was mostly supporting hospitality programs in Europe, and they sold our division to a European investor and eliminated all the US-based jobs. So and the company I was working for was getting ready to go public. So it was a hiring freeze across the board. So here I am like, okay. I had to do some soul searching. And what I realized is I was reading a book on confidence for women. And I realized, and they talked about imposter syndrome and all this, and I realized that there was this voice that had been in my head for years saying, one day I'm going to work full-time in CSR. I was working on my doctorate degree in social impact management at the time. I'd been teaching it. I'd co-founded an incubator for social enterprise. And this little voice was, one day I'm going to work full-time in CSR. And I said to myself, you are 46 freaking years old. What day are you waiting for? Whose permission do you think you need? You almost have a doctorate in this topic. And it unleashed for me. Like, it's been a journey, but it really was this like kind of unleashing for me, because it was like, who has put this in your head that you're not good enough for this? And that book, the book called The Confidence Code, which was given to me by someone at the company I'd just been laid off from. She was like, I'm sorry, I wish we could hire you right now. And she gave me this book and some recommendations and stuff. And that book was really a turning point, because it made me realize how much I was limiting my own journey and path because I had that imposter syndrome thing. And I still struggle with it constantly. And I think it's one of those things about me that surprises people sometimes, because I'm so assertive and so smart and so articulate. But the truth is, sometimes I'm like, does anybody believe I can really do this? Because I don't, like sometimes I'm just like wallowing in my own sadness of like, somebody please pay me to do some work. But that's just entrepreneurship, and that's just
Yeah,
COVID, and that's just, bad days and stuff.
sure.
But hopefully that helps a little bit, Sarah.
It's a powerful story. And I would say, first off, I would say to that imposter that creeps in on you, Aurora, nonsense, right? They're an imposter. They don't belong there, right? And I know sometimes imposter syndrome is something that gets attached to women in the workplace, right? Men struggle with it too. But I will say, if you are, the call out to all the dudes out there, right? If you're in a company and an organization, give voice, right? And listen and get out of the way sometimes and let women step in and speak, because their perspectives will teach you something. I promise you. I promise you that they will. My wife has taught me many things along the way, but so many amazing female leaders that I've been lucky enough to know as well. So really important, because imposter syndrome is something we got to try to push out of here, because it's an imposter, doesn't belong. All right, so let's see, where are we at on time? Okay, let's kind of do a little bit of a preview to the back part of our conversation here, Aurora. Let's talk about climate justice and kind of the supply chain pieces around it. But before we get to supply chain and kind of that, I'd just be curious, what does climate justice mean to you as a person?
Well, I think the word justice and fairness have always been hot button topics to me. I believe very much in things being fair, and justice is a system. It's a mentality and an attitude, and it's a system. So I think that for me, it's about doing what is fair by the people who are impacted by things, right? And it's a really about having a holistic view, because climate carries with it this very sort of earth, planet, nature piece. Justice is about humans, right? So to me, it's about a holistic view and a systems view of everything. It's about really seeing how your decision. So the example that came up in a conversation that I was having in the last couple of months was actually just after the new climate report came out, and everybody was kind of like, in a very much sort of frenzy immediately following that of just how urgent and bad things are. And so this person was suggesting that every vendor should have to do a scope 3 analysis. And I'm like, okay, it's like, let's think about what that means to all of the college dropout entrepreneurs who are following their passion, make really good cookies and have figured out how to scale that business, and they employ single moms, and they've helped people get out of addiction, and they make those great cookies and they're doing really great. They don't even know what those words coming out of your mouth mean, and you have now just completely eliminated them from the running of your next event RFP. And so I think a lot of what I'm realizing as I do more work and sort of explore more and have more conversations around supplier diversity is how much people are just completely unaware of how decisions like that have an impact. And there's this concept, to me, another way of looking at climate justice is through the lens of trade-offs. You will almost always, unlikely any of us on this call will live long enough to see a day where there are no trade-offs. You will always have trade-offs. So to me, it's really about understanding the decision criteria for how you're going to choose when the trade-off comes. And some may choose climate over justice, and some may choose justice over climate. And sometimes you can work more and more and more towards this climate justice balance where you really can have both. I'm not saying you can't have both. I'm just saying that a lot of the decisions that the vast majority of people are making in procurement today kind of swing a little bit one way or the other. And it tends to be more on the favor of climate than on the favor of justice in most procurement, in most efforts to make procurement more sustainable.
One of the things that I want to say is, like Viridescent is a sustainability company that doesn't really believe in climate action, because we believe that if those in power, as the system is designed right now, takes action, those with power are going to gain more, and those without power are going to have even less, right? It has to have some element of equality and equity included, and that's where we think the climate justice component comes into it. So really appreciate that. And one more question for you, Aurora, before we break to our song. 60 seconds. You have 60 seconds to answer this. Can you explain scope 3 carbon emissions and maybe scope 1 and 2?
Yeah. Sorry, I often throw that out.
Speaking of climate justice.
Carbon emissions are divided into 3 scopes: scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. Scope 1 is what you can control. It's the emissions of gases out of your refrigerants, out of your HVAC. It's the energy that you use to operate your building. That's pretty easy to measure-ish, right? Most organizations, large organizations, are doing that. Scope 2 is the emissions from the energy it took. So the power companies, the emissions that they create in generating energy for you to do your daily operations. There's a little bit of double accounting kind of going on there, but everybody understands that that's the math. So that's also a known entity. Scope 3 is everything else. It's your employees commuting, it's your supply chain, it's the shipping, it's the waste, it's everything else. And it is complex, it is messy, and it is challenging. And very few companies are able to really fully measure scope 3, especially in supply chains where there's lots of layers and where those layers become more and more opaque and there's less transparency. I mean, think about it. In some supply chains, agricultural supply chains, the people that produce the raw ingredients don't even have bank accounts, right? So the idea that they're somehow measuring their carbon emissions, like it's just, a little bit lopsided. And just a quick clarification, my sustainable procurement course is designed for the beginner and the small business. I introduce what scope 3 is in it, but it's not even about, hey, let's do a scope 3 analysis. It's way even more beginner than that, just to get people to understand just the concept of what their footprint is socially and environmentally in their supply chains, and just to begin the evaluation process.
Amazing. Yeah, no, I mean, and that's a really good place to start. As we know, when somebody starts their sustainability journey, they often get a little hooked, and then they'll work towards things as they go, right? And hopefully scope 3 comes down the line, but you got to start somewhere. So, okay, we are at the top of the hour. We're going to play a song here and take a few minutes. So if anybody that wants to get up, get a drink, go to the bathroom, take a few breaths, just take a minute. And of course, if you need to go, that is just fine. If you are interested in any of Aurora's work or her procurement class or the Green Team course, of course, as well, feel free to sign up for our email experience, and we will send you a discount code to help support Aurora and her work. So, all right, we're going to go to a song. I will warn you, this is by our good friend Cranky Conductor. He is a little cranky, and I think, given our conversation about how the sustainability champion sometimes is frustrated, I think this would be a good outlet for us to listen to Jeff rant a little bit. This song is called A Special Place in Hell, so it is on the intense end of the spectrum. And some beautiful drone footage. And enjoy, and we'll see you back here in a few minutes.
If I'm dead as you listen to this, this, let's keep this as long as we can. If you stay silent long enough, you can hear the laughter of the earth. 1 foot forward and 2 steps back, we drain the lake to catch the fish. We were not trained to take care by your own happiness. There's a special place in hell for you all who knew and didn't care. Greed and fear made the truth disappear, and now we've got arms to bear. Town called paradise, not to be confused with pleasure. Folks burned in their own homes, cremate your desire. Among the ashes and the search for the bones, their lives were stained with smoke. Warning signs of emergencies left behind with nowhere to go. There's a special place in hell for you all who knew and didn't care. Greed and fear made the truth disappear, and now we've got arms to bear. Now we've got arms to bear. Shall I see you there? It's twice the size it takes to say nobody got time to think. Take the earth up and let the cash get gone before the ship sinks. There's a special place in hell for you all who knew and didn't care. Greed and fear made the truth disappear, and now we've got arms to bear. Short-lived success is always progress, lies by the American dream. Billions strive to rise up and thrive, and came apart at the seams. Came apart at the seams. Came apart at.
Okay, welcome back. I don't know about everybody else, but I feel a little less angsty, get some of that aggression out. That's how we do it, right? We do it through art and community and things. And then we go out to the masses and we give them all the best parts of us, right? That's what it's all about. Okay, welcome back, everybody. This is Chance, aka the designer here in the VIRIVERSE, and we are with Aurora Benton, talking about all kinds of good stuff, but specifically illuminating healthy, good, sustainable business into the world, and a little bit on climate justice and supply chain. This is a part of our event and conversation where we have an open forum. Anybody want to jump in and say hello? Donna, yeah.
Hey, hi, good morning. Thank you, everybody. I just want to say just a couple of things. One, just being a part of this community and this tribe is just so fitting and so comfortable. I mean, I just went through something this morning where I work for a zero waste solution to the plastic water bottle challenge. And so working the supply chains and trying to get this in is always hurdles are put through. And Aurora has been so great in terms of paving the way to educate procurement on the supply chain. And I think that's finally starting to filter through. I mean, what an amazing kind of niche focus that is so important. So I do see that your voice and this message is getting through. And I do see that a lot of the hotel chains are, in fact, these procurement people are like kind of mad. That's why that song is so perfect. They're mad because these are now directives that are now coming down from the top and filtering into the procurement to saying, look, guys, we've got to do this. We're measuring and we've got these goals in place. But I'm constantly, and yeah, I'd love to bring this up, the situation this morning, but at a different time, but just constantly hitting those hurdles of the supply chain and the existing contracts and those types of things. But I just want to say thank you. It's rippling out there for sure, and the work that you're doing is amazing. So
thank you, Donna. And I wanted to say a couple of things on what you just said. One is those mandates are being filtered down without enough of the why, right? So those people in procurement, that's why I built the course that I built, because it's a 9-minute video on the circular economy and plastics. I'm not asking you to take a master's degree course in this content. Right. Watch a 9-minute video on this. Watch a 9-minute video on humane treatment in supply chain so you understand why fair trade and these things.
Because they all care.
I'm sorry?
They all care.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it just helps people understand, like, oh, okay, so this is why, like, recycled content, this is why it matters. This is like, okay, so, and I think it will help change the mentality a little bit. But, I think the other aspects of what you're saying that really need to be looked at, and that I've been writing on, and I just developed a new talk on this, Donna, that I did as a guest lecture at a college a couple of weeks ago, which is integrating sustainability into RFPs. Yeah. So just needing to look more at the practicality of doing that and changing our contracts and the way we go about contracts. And so there's a lot of change coming this way, but there's still systems that lock people into the old way of doing things. And some of those are mental mind maps, sort of the mental, what is that called? Like the mental maps, right? Yep. And some of it is like literally like the technology systems and the approval codes and all that stuff that prevent this. And so those of us who are trying to change these systems, we have to understand that we're going to like run up against some walls. Right? That just because somebody puts on their website or puts out a press release, we care about supplier diversity, we care about fair trade, we care about whatever. The chocolate manufacturers have been committing for years that they're going to rid their supply chains of slave and child labor. And they keep moving the goalposts and moving the goalposts and moving the goalposts, right? So those are just the realities that those of us inside trying to drive that change are going to continue to face. So keep doing the good work, Donna.
Yeah, I'm out there. Thank you.
Awesome. Wow. So we've got a couple of new people in the audience. So I just want to kind of reintroduce Aurora really quickly so that Masha and Sam and Rachel get a good sense of Aurora's background. So she is the chief change agent for Astrapto, which exists to advance positive impact in the workplace. And while sometimes Viridescent can be about reaching like the 1% and inspiring like the sustainability champions so they can go reach the everyday average sort of person that wants to add a little purpose into their work, Aurora is kind of the opposite. She wants to reach those everyday average normal just people inside the system doing their thing, right? Her passion to make sustainability practical and approachable is for people whose main job is not just sustainability, but have a passion to improve social and environmental performance too. There's a little spark in there. You just need a little spark, and Aurora will help you turn it into a flame. She offers a lot of courses, and these can be taken online. She also does consulting work and some other amazing things. So I'm really glad to have Aurora with us today. Anybody else want to come up on stage, introduce yourself, say hello, ask Aurora a question, talk a little bit about your work? Rachel, yeah.
Hi.
Yeah, hi, Rachel.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Aurora. I've not met you before, so cool.
To meet you.
Yeah, so I'm Rachel Sheila-Can. I'm in the fashion industry. I've been in the industry for 23 years as a designer and design manager. And I went on a sustainability journey probably about 5 years ago. And yeah, really started at first on the kind of customer sort of sector, and did events and things that brought together kind of vintage eco brands, sewing workshops, swap shops, so anyone could get involved with sustainability. Learned loads from there. Went on my own sustainability journey and kind of taught myself a lot over the years. Went to events, met loads of people, studied some courses as well, and then subsequently started teaching sustainability ethics at business school. And then I've just started my consultancy probably about 2 years ago to help businesses in fashion move from non-sustainable to sustainable futures. I also do courses for startups as well, and other things. So,
Awesome.
and I'm the founder of the Ecosystem Incubator, because I've been working with small business for so long. It was about having small businesses work together in a living systems ecosystemic way. So
yes, awesome. I love it.
Yeah, but I really like the idea of you introducing how to look and set standards and things from within. So that sounds really interesting.
So Rachel is clearly, she's awesome just in general, but she is the regeneration here in the VIRIVERSE and kind of championing this idea of a regenerative fashion. Are you wearing, what is the shirt?
I'm wearing a panther because my spirit animal is panther.
Yes,
so
yes, her.
I'm wearing panther today.
Love it.
I don't know that I've seen that jacket, and I just became an even bigger fan. That's fun. You're gonna have to get me one with wolves. Can you get me one with wolves and glaciers on it? I would totally rock that.
I can design them and procure them. You know, my experience is in supply chains, finding things. This is actually my design originally, so from back in the day when I was doing other things.
That's so awesome. I have been known to wear an upcycled suit before, made from trade show banners. It's green and orange, so I'm all about, yes, orange pants, no less.
I've seen it. I've seen it.
That's true. Yeah, it's a look for sure. All right.
It's
so
awesome.
Anybody else want to jump in and say hello? Of course, I do want to say you're more than welcome to just sit in listening mode too and listen to us gab a little bit as well.
Hi everyone, my name's Sam. I'm definitely someone who's constantly learning about the sustainability journey, and I'm probably the only one who comes from a background, I imagine, that isn't directly related to sustainability. But where I came from was a marketing background, and I've always been passionate about communication and how things in the world that you put out and you manifest can impact people. And I think business has a great ability to drive force for good. And I fell in love with how networks and community can drive action. And then as I got into the climate and sustainability space and learned more and more about the issues we have, but also the amazing things that people are doing, such as everyone here, I know, those who I know have got a great background and drive for that change. I've fallen more and more in love with the idea of bringing business and people and teams and vision towards making impact in the world. So I've set up a platform called Wonder. We're a building in public in a kind of, I suppose, in a loose sense of saying that we're a work in progress, but with a strong vision to try and bring people together to upskill, to impact the world in this new green economy, and always on a learning journey, as I say. So pleasure to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Amazing, Sam. Yeah, and we, Wonder is a very key strategic partner to VIRIVERSE, and we're kind of hosting these conversations through the Wonder portal. So it's how everybody RSVPs and you get access to the Zoom link. And so we're sitting in Wonderland, as we would say in the VIRIVERSE. Let's talk about kind of the diversity and equitable supply chain pieces. Aurora, what starting advice? Because so many of us are just starting on this journey in this regard. 2020 certainly has created a movement, right? And even those that have been at a long time can always be reminded of what it is like to go back to basics, because maybe they're missing some things. Yeah. So what are your best practices that you would recommend to everybody in the audience?
Well, I think what I'm really learning in this process is, so I had already been studying social entrepreneurs and small businesses for years. I did my doctorate study in that. But mostly I had worked with and studied white entrepreneurs, not exclusively, but mostly, just not by any, that was not intentional. It just sort of, that's how it was, right? And now that I'm trying to expand that lens of buy local and buy small into more diversity and disadvantaged businesses, I am learning even more. And I had been studying and looking at that, but just diving deeper and deeper into it, what I'm really realizing is that everyone needs to start with questioning their assumptions. And everyone needs to recognize that, especially if you are in an established corporate system or government system or nonprofit, but if it's been around for a while, something is going to have to break. Some system, whether it's, we always start with we have a priority vendor list that we always start with. We send our RFPs out to the vendors that responded last year. Whatever the system, this is how long it takes to get a vendor set up in our system. Our corporate requires us to have 90-day payment terms with all of our vendors. All that crap, that doesn't work. All of those are barriers that a typical disadvantaged business will not be able to jump. And so, they can't live with terms like 90-day payments. They're not already on the preferred vendor list, whether it's because they're newer, because they're Black, because they're whatever the reason, they've been excluded from those lists. So all of these normal, we're in these ruts. Right? A rut is something, you get in a rut and you think about a dirt trail and a wagon going in that's where rut, right? That you're in the rut. And the reason we don't get out of the rut is because we're in a rut, right? And there becomes this unwritten, unspoken policy based on we've always done it this way. People inherently resist change. So it's not that the people who don't change these systems are villains that are racist villains. Now, some of them may be, okay, let's, call it what it is. But most of them are not racist villains trying to keep, small disadvantaged businesses out of the procurement system. They are resistant to change. They believe that there are policies and procedures, sometimes when there aren't even actual policies and procedures. It's just so ingrained in the we've always done it this way mentality that people think that it's actually almost like law or rule, right? So you're going to confront all of that. And that is messy, challenging stuff to overcome, because a lot of times the people who have the power to say no to you when you want to change, they've got some very compelling reasons for it. And again, it's very innocuous, right? It's not like they're racist villains. It's more like, this is what, it'll take us 6 weeks to get the lawyers to write up a new contract. Well, we all know that nobody's going to okay that, right? Just these little things that will get in the way of change. And so if you're going to be a change maker, you have to recognize going in that it's going to require all these other behind the scene changes. in order to get the change you might be trying to go for. So again, I think this is where trade-offs come in, because I think what you want to do is you want to start small. You want to start with maybe assessing, okay, and this is what I do in my procurement course. Let's start with the business case. Where is the change I'm trying to drive most tied to an economic benefit, cost savings, revenue generation, risk avoidance that I can quantify, whatever it is, right? Let's start with that. And let's also start with the stakeholder assessment. Who are the stakeholders in my way that I know are going to fight me every step of the way? Well, let's not tackle them first. Let's start with the stakeholders you already have on board. Let's look at the stakeholders you've already had lunchroom chats with, and if you've already established that they want the same kind of change that you want, and they have the ability to make little decisions, right? Like, oh, I got somebody in accounts payable to agree to pay these smaller vendors on a 30-day term. It's not written in the contract, but they're not in trouble for doing it, and they've agreed to do it. So that's where I'm going to start, right? So it's finding where you can start to make small changes and doing those just one step at a time, but recognizing that is what it will take, and some of these changes may take many, many months or even years, but just because of how much you have to unravel and dismantle the systems that created these problems in the first place. And it's more than just, since justice is a word you use, it's more than just race. Race is sort of overarching thing that's woven through most of it, but also just even looking at the justice system in terms of the number of people incarcerated in this country for nonviolent crimes and the difficulty they have in starting businesses, getting bank loans, getting jobs even, right? And so, I mean, even something like choosing a vendor that has a work program for formerly incarcerated or formerly homeless, or, people who have barriers to employment, much less entrepreneurship, right? So just even like say, oh, okay, I've already got maybe like these 3 or 4 vendors I work with, and it's going to be really hard. I'm going to have to move mountains to get us to change one of these vendors. But what if you had a relationship, if you built a relationship with one of those vendors and found out that they have a real passion for developing their own social mission, and that they want to develop a work training program for a certain population that has barriers to employment? Like, that's another way. Like, there's multiple ways to solve the problem, right? But even that is going to take, that's collaboration, it's relationships, it's a long play, right? And so I think having that sort of partnership mentality when you're going into this is another best practice, and realizing, like, one of the things that has come up in this supplier diversity conversation, and that I put into my RFP talk I gave a couple of weeks ago, is, RFPs. Kim Bryden on our panel for the Society for Sustainable Events, she said it perfectly. She's like, stop making your RFPs so prescriptive, right? So the example she gave is, we're doing an event for 200 people. We need a breakfast. We want orange juice, frozen bagels, yogurt, blueberries. Like, and so the only vendor that's going to be able to specifically reply to the specific request is Cisco or US Foods, or somebody who has all of those things in their inventory, right? The big players. But what if instead you went to a local kitchen incubator that has a lot of small businesses, or a fashion, same thing with what Rachel's working with, like a fashion incubator or something, and said, hey, we have this need for, normally we do these corporate t-shirts. Why don't you guys, like, here's our budget, here's what we're looking for, here's some of our zero waste requirements. Why don't your entrepreneurs collaborate together, design something, and maybe this entrepreneur does this piece and that entrepreneur does that piece, right? And together we can answer this RFP. We can give you a good breakfast, but it's not going to look like this orange juice frozen bagel yogurt thing that you always expected. But let us do what we do. And you're going to have this cool story to tell. You're going to be able to check a bunch of your supplier diversity boxes, right? And so again, that takes, when somebody's busy and they have a lot going on. So another best practice again is expect that things will take a little bit more of an investment, but you don't get something for nothing. You're going to have to put in a little bit of that time if you want to be able to fulfill those social and environmental goals.
So I'd like to pose a question. What do humans like more than they like consistency, habit, routine? Because they do like those things. What do they like more though? They like to feel special.
Yes.
And getting a meal that only that moment, your group, your meeting, your company, your whatever, right? Whatever you're doing, in that moment, you're getting a meal that nobody else is going to get, right? Because it's fit to the season, to the location, whatever it might be, right? So I want to, Rachel, I'd love to bring you in just to speak from the perspective of fashion, because supply chain there is really, really important and really broken in a lot of places, right? There's a lot of unfair and unethical labor practices. And so I'd just be curious maybe to kind of take us through where the fashion industry is at right now and how you're feeling about the future of the diverse and equitable and fair trade and healthy supply chain kind of movement when it comes to circularity, regeneration, any of these kind of models that you're looking at. Yeah, just be curious your perspective.
Sure. Yeah, if I might be here for some time, but with all of those points, I'd say it's in the supply chain, it's twofold. It depends on your size of your business. Obviously, if you're a large company, I think the shift has been in the consumer base that they are actually seeing things happening now, especially with things like modern day slavery that was actually happening here in the UK, in Leicester, for as long as I've been in the industry. So I'd heard whispers of it all over the place, and it was just something that was kind of there. So I think for that, there is like a lot of people, customer base, who are kind of getting that and actually holding these businesses to account. So I think large business can actually do something to shift that. There's legislation to come in place with that. It depends on the country, of course. Like each country has their own sort of things going on. For instance, Portugal is really easy to kind of work with because they have a governmental legislation in the fashion industry that I know of, whereas in the UK we don't have. So it really is bespoke depending on where it is in the world. And then we have the other side, of which is where I've come from, which is small to medium-sized businesses, which is really difficult to even find a supplier in the first place. When you're a tiny business, to go out there and find a supplier who actually will look at you when you've got small minimum order quantities and things like that is really, really difficult, let alone ask them to have SEDEX requirements in place or things like that. So I've been working on that aspect of everything. There are some great suppliers out there who are working with small businesses and looking at reduction of production and really doing small quantities. So there are some people out there who are doing really good stuff. And then there's the small suppliers. So I think Aurora was talking about that kind of thing, where embracing new and different supply chains, especially on the regenerative side of things. There are great collaborative networks out there who are already creating in the regenerative way, but don't always have the actual money to put GOTS on their certificates and get certificates in the first place to actually showcase that they are, so I've spoken to even bigger suppliers that really have problems with keeping up with costs on on achieving that GOTS all the time for people. So yeah, I can't remember the second part of your question now.
I mean, no, you kind of hit on, I threw a monkey wrench in there talking about like circularity and regeneration and stuff. We'll leave that for another.
Circularity is in its infancy, I'd say, and especially in our industry, we're kind of, a lot of places only just going on the journey of sustainability, let alone circularity. But I think there will be things coming into play, and there are partners that I'm working with who are already offering circularity as a bigger thing in terms of end of life. But yeah, generally it needs to be designed into that system in the first place.
Yeah, what I'd offered in that, and then Aurora, I'd love your response to some of what Rachel offered too, is just circularity wise is a quick kind of definition of what it is. It's three things, right? It's reducing material usage, pulling it from the earth and all that. Number two, it's keeping materials in use and in flow. I think that part is the opportunity that we have to benefit a healthier, more equitable, diverse supply chain. If we use our materials smarter, we're going to present and build new opportunities for people to be successful, I think. And then number three is to regenerate natural systems. And that will happen if we do 1 and 2 really well. So just an added piece there. Next month, we'll actually be talking about circular and circular innovation and going through basics all the way up to kind of advanced stuff. So more to come in our next conversations. Yeah, Rachel, go ahead.
I think there's another added point, especially in our industry, that circularity can't be fast. We can't just say, let's replace fast fashion with fast circularity, because that's actually just going to create loads more unintended consequences. So we need to definitely look at longevity, quality, you know, bringing that back into it. But how we do that in our economic system that has been created for fast fashion, things like fast fashion, you know, it gave me a job for 20 years at the end of the day.
Yeah, right. And that speaks to, you know, the progression of this, right? It's just a process. So Aurora, I don't know if you have any thoughts, and then maybe we'll offer, I've got maybe a question for Sam to jump up and join us too, but do you have any responses, reactions, insights?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I would say, yeah, you know, some of the points that Rachel made are very, very important. First of all, context is everything, right? It's hard to get, when it comes to sustainability, it's hard to give blanket recommendations because, you know, Rachel mentioned the case of there's a law in Portugal that makes some of this easy, but it doesn't exist in the UK. It's the same with, you know, waste systems. I live in a small town in the southeast of the United States. We do not have curbside recycling here, which for probably most of you who live in cities, you've had it for decades already. So I have to put my cardboard and metal in my car and drive it to a local park, and you know, at certain times of the day the gate is unlocked and I go and I empty my trunk, and all my plastic and glass, about once a month, every month or so, I pile all that in my car and drive it to a town an hour away. And I mean, that's my recycling. The businesses around here, I mean, like the grocery store, I know the local grocery store, they bale all their cardboard and put it back on the trucks that go back to the distribution center. So at least they're doing that, right? And they do actually have some recycle bins outside for like soft plastics. Not sure exactly where all that's going, but you know, so even those kinds of things that are part of the circular economy, just even the infrastructure to handle some of these ideas will be strong in some areas and weak in another. It's not necessarily because I'm in a small town or in the conservative South. I'm sure there are probably some smaller towns that, because the right person cared and made the business case, now they have amazing MRF facility, right? So, you know, context is everything. I think that's part of it. I think the other thing when it comes to working with social entrepreneurs, which I know Rachel will understand, you know, with the kind of entrepreneurs you're working with, I deal with this. I work more with food entrepreneurs, but I've worked in, you know, a lot of different types over the years. And there's always this tension of what is your core mission? And you're going to have to recognize that if you've come into this from the perspective of a social entrepreneur, you will be confronted with your economic model. If your economic model is based on consumption, then at some point you're going to have a hard internal discussion with yourself about, can I be a Patagonia and actually tell people to buy less? Or will that pay my rent?
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, I'm torn here, right? Like, it's a really tough decision. And one of the exciting and fun things I love about mentoring social entrepreneurs is just walking that journey with them and having to say, I'm doing that actually with one of my entrepreneurs right now. Like, she has a business in China. She's American, but she has a business in China. She works with rural farmers, and she's starting to get some of these big deals come through. And she's realizing that part of her strategy, like, she always had this sort of dual mission, and she's starting to really see that she can't pursue both of these missions very well. They're both admirable, right? But with her limited resources and her small team, it's going to have to be like, you're going to kind of have to go one way or the other, right? So that's not always the case, but I think having those sort of strategic conversations where everyone who is part of the organization, whether that's 3 people or 3,000 people or 30,000 people, is everyone on the same page when it comes to, this is our vision, this is our purpose, this is what we're going to do, because that's your beacon, right? Like you asked that in the very beginning, Chance, what's your beacon? Because you're going to be pulled in so many different directions. You're going to have all these challenges, but you need to have something that's sort of like your guiding light so that you can make decisions within that boundary. And at a certain point, you may find this business doesn't work within that boundary. And that's a sad, hard day for a lot of entrepreneurs. Do you pivot and do you evolve the boundaries? A lot of social entrepreneurs do that. They kind of start to get a little squishy because they find that that's the only way to economically survive, right? So I would say that, just remember what your mission is and be unapologetic about it, but also live in reality, especially if you have bills to pay and a family.
Fine line for every sustainability champion, entrepreneur in the world, right? Activist to all of it. Wow. Okay. So I want to do kind of a quick reset here. And then I want to maybe bring Sam up to the stage to talk a little bit about inclusive and accessible education and like lifelong learning. But really quickly, a lot of what we've talked about the last 15, 20 minutes, a lot about like sustainability, entrepreneurs and the journey and mentorship that's available. So Viridescent's actually rolling out a sustainability mentorship program in the back end of the year here and kind of into the new year. So if anybody listening is interested in that, you may just find Aurora and Rachel along the way in that journey too. The way to access that will be through our email experience. That's you'll get first access and free access to some of the workshops we'll be doing. So that can be found at linktr.ee/viridescent, and you can sign up for the email there and kind of begin your journey or carry on your journey to becoming a sustainability champion. Sam Reeder, so I want to bring you up, if you don't mind, and talk a little bit about the education piece around some of this, because that's really one of the most important parts. And we talk about like in a circular economy, how are we going to do that? Well, one of the best ways to help people build a circular economy is to give them the skill set. And one of the things that I'm so excited about what Wonder is doing as a platform and your mission is that you're giving an opportunity to continue the learner's journey for a lifelong endeavor. And for some people that maybe didn't have the best school system or got the raw end of the deal with teachers, didn't fit in that learning way, right? The way our traditional education systems work, maybe it didn't reach people super well along the way. And as we know, there's not a lot of stuff around sustainability, teaching like emotional intelligence and how to be good with people. That doesn't really happen in a lot of our school systems. But all around the world, there's inequities in access to education. And so I'd be curious your perspective, Sam, when we think about like creating climate justice, taking action on climate change, building diverse businesses and equitable strategies, and just healthy in general. I'd be really curious about your perspective from the education component.
Yeah, sure. And I think the best way to have this conversation is more to say, really, for me, I've never actually worked in the educational system, but in terms of the socioeconomic research and the things we're observing, even with wonder, we've always wanted to facilitate and put the spotlight on the topic rather than say we are the authority in the actual topic of how you change this massive pillar of civilization that is still very important, whilst there are things about it that maybe don't lean towards the goals we should have as a species and civilization. It's still critical towards the best societies in the world where education has that strong correlation. So even with Rachel and Aurora, I know the work you're doing is all in education, and you can probably talk from the lecture theatres you've been in, the students' perspective, and actually being educators yourselves. From our perspective and what we're seeing, I think it's really interesting how starting to challenge where education really came from. And it was kind of a 19th, in terms of traditional education as we have it today, it was really like a 19th century manifestation and creation. And we were talking about this the other day, actually, whereby, people would go through this process of signaling and qualification and classification in order to fit into a cog, into a machine, into an operation. And it was a way of signaling those who should have those higher jobs and those who shouldn't. And I think we're entering into a world now where, with the problems we're facing are so frequently changing, and there are so many different unknowns that are appearing faster and faster. When you think about, like, just in the last 10 years, the rise of the machines and automation, that model of education no longer works. And actually, we're seeing it across the board, where this idea of life skills or 21st century skills of actually how to be the best human you can be, creativity, imagination, teamwork, communication. These things are becoming so much more important to businesses and to industry and the economy, because machines can do the things way better than any human can in terms of pattern recognition and repeatability. So we need things that really bring out the best in humans and in people. And I think that stems from inciting a sense of lifelong learning rather than just acquiring a certificate. It stems into constantly having a growth mindset, almost being entrepreneurial, basically, which is really all an entrepreneur is looking at a problem and then trying to figure out how to solve it in the fastest way possible for economic gain. But we should definitely make more focus on social gain as well. So I think with where education goes, it's a massive point. There's so much about it that I can't comment on. As I say, I'm not an authority. But I really believe in a world that centers the individual. It becomes a learner-driven activity, not a teacher-driven one. It becomes a lifelong journey, not something over a few years and then you're done. And then for us as a platform, we want to facilitate that curiosity, which can go anywhere. It's more like a bowl of spaghetti than it is a ladder. And even careers now, there's no such thing really. People have to pave their own way. So I think with what we're facing as a species, which is so unknown, the future of every individual is unknown. Community and lifelong learning are the tools people need to find their way in the world. And I think that's incredibly exciting. There's so much opportunity, and how empowering for a young person, and even someone who's maybe 70 plus, to realize that tomorrow could be different. And I think that's such a powerful ethos that every human can really have hope towards, more so than just, I got my A star or I didn't, I'm clever or I'm not. I think that's a really old doctrine, and it's not good for us as we face the future.
Can I chime something in here, Chance?
Yeah, please.
So, when I was working in higher ed before I started Astrapto, I got into higher ed. Had not been my career, but I got into it and I was good at it. I have a good intuition for education. I designed really great classes. My students had great experiences. And before long, I became the director of the program. And then I was in charge of, well, even as I was transitioning into that role, I was in charge of hiring and training faculty, mostly adjunct, because it was a small, program. And so I would interview the students would be like, oh, like as I taught less, they would all come to me like, oh, I wish you would teach more. We miss you in the class. And I'm like, well, I'm trying to build the whole program and I'm hiring faculty. And I would interview faculty and 100% of them would answer the right question when I would ask them, like, describe your style of teaching, describe what you want the classroom to be like. 100% of them would say, well, I don't want it to be like when I was in college. I don't want it to be like this boring lecture. They would, this whole, we want it to be more dynamic. And 100% of them, when they got hired, what do you think they would do? They would deliver education the same way they had said they didn't enjoy, because that's all they had known. And I quickly realized that my job, as much as I miss being in the classroom, my job was to turn the faculty into me. Like if I've got some, and don't believe me, I'm not trying to say like I'm perfect and I know it all. But I clearly had some gifts and talents, and the students really responded to that. Clearly my faculty were interested in being that kind of instructor, but this whole idea that they would just magically be that person because they recognized that was needed, I had to really spend time developing and training them and giving them specific ideas and activities on how to be more dynamic. And just, I mean, like it came down to like, you need to use students' names more often. You need to walk through the classroom more. You need to break up the classroom in this way, like giving them very practical things they could do to not be the instructor they were trying not to be, right? So I think, Sam, so much of what you said resonates with me. And I just thought, wow, that's what we're still dealing with. There's still hundreds of thousands of professors out there, because they've been in their jobs for 10, 15, 20, 30 years, that are still teaching in this old model of sort of this elite, I stand here and know everything. You sit and take notes. It's sort of like lost in the crowd. That kind of education is still the majority. That's still mostly what is happening, not the kind of vision that you have, Sam, which is where we need to eventually go. And part of that is from a higher ed standpoint, it takes years to change the accreditation systems and the mentalities of higher ed, years and years to dismantle the old school way of doing things. So I think all this non-official higher academic learning, like what we're all doing and what Wonder's about, that is one way. The more prolific that becomes, the more maybe higher ed has to kind of sit up and take notice. Wow, somebody can get a job without getting our degree. And that's been going on for about a decade, for more than a decade now. Higher ed's kind of going, oh, we might be in trouble if people can actually get a degree by taking a bunch of random online courses, putting them on their LinkedIn profile and giving an impressive interview. So, yeah.
Right. No, and I'd like to just say to that absolutely, I totally agree. And even, the professors who are still teaching the way they're teaching, it's never I can never empathize with the journey they've had to go on. And so it's not right for me to comment at all about their teaching style too much in terms of them individually. But this is why I think it's so important to place, what you're doing, Aurora, Chance, Rachel, on more of a spotlight, because you're creating a pathway for people outside of that slow moving tank, that archaic system, which whilst it has got great proponents for our society, people need to get on with what they want to do and move forwards. And that's where you all come in. And that's why, for me, building a platform to showcase and celebrate what you do is my goal. I'd love to just make more of what you're all doing, really. And I totally agree in that vision of having what you're doing is the way for people to circumvent the old style. And there's a signaling issue there, which is interesting you've raised. What do you think, there's loads of different ways of certification now, and there's different things coming about where people can gain that signal to an employer. Have you come across any of that at all, Aurora, or even Rachel, in your travels?
Yeah, it's still a messy space, because so much of the corporate hiring is still based on having a traditional degree, an accredited degree. So you see and hear some outliers out there that will say like, hey, we'll offer jobs to people who can show that they have that you have to have some sort of certification or credential or something that you can show that says I've completed this course, right? It's like I said, 10 years ago when I was in higher ed, I was reading books and hearing about all this, but people are still getting degrees. That's still getting a traditional college degree is still the number one goal for most people, because that's still how the world runs and how the world spins and how the world hires. But there are examples. I mean, none of them are coming to mind because I'm not really in that space as much anymore. But you know, like you have these like credlies and these other sort of badges and other ways to demonstrate, yes, I did this and yes, I learned that. But a lot of schools, I think what's really starting to happen now is that especially the adult learner targeted schools have gotten really good at recognizing life experience and creating systems where you can explain your life experience, your years of experience, what you've done, and that can get credit towards a degree. So for somebody who's in their 30s or 40s and missed that chance, you know, in their 20s, that's actually a really interesting, you know, route for those people. And the fact that universities are starting to create those pathways means they're opening their minds and ideas to the idea that an education doesn't mean we have a grip on this person for 4 years. It can be a more dynamic thing that we can steward and ordain, for lack of a better word, so that this person can get a degree.
So Chance here, I'd like
really
to
interesting.
jump in. And did you have something to add, Sam?
No, just acknowledging the points. So thank you.
So I want to flag time here. We've been really locked in here for a little bit, and we do want to end close to the end of the hour here, but we've got a few more things we want to cover. But one thing I wanted to say before we move on from this topic is, you know, to you, Sam, talking about not having an education and background, a background education sort of expertise. We have a VIRIVERSE sustainability beacon that says those that feel they don't know anything may just know everything. Sometimes the best people to reinvent a system or a industry or a business is one that doesn't know that much about it, right? Or doesn't have the experience in it, right? Because you have a perspective, you're not shaped by the system quite the same. Now, we're all shaped by the education system because we went through it generally, right? Or at least hopefully, right? Not everybody has gone through the education system, which speaks to the value of wonder and what, Sam, you're creating. So you may not be an expert, but that doesn't mean you can't radically revolutionize the education system along the way either. So, all right. So Aurora, 2 questions. We'll start with the first one here. So what is one kind of big tip that you would give to a sustainable entrepreneur or intrapreneur or both? And an intrapreneur meaning somebody working for a company inside the system trying to affect change and be creative in an innovative sort of way. But what's the one big piece of advice that you would give to somebody that is, let's say they're starting their journey or maybe just kind of on their way?
I'm torn between 2 really good ones, and they're both really short, so I'm going to cheat and give you both. One, Google is your friend. I have a doctorate degree, but when people are like, how did you know that? I can use Google. It really comes down to, you have a question about something, ask Google. Because there's a lot of great people out there like me and everybody else on this call. We write blogs, we give you all, you know, it's out there, right? So it's about being willing to be a researcher. Carla, hats off to you for being the researcher. It's about asking good questions, and Google is your friend. The other is the quote. My quote comes from a book of entrepreneurship that I used to teach out of. And it says, better a mediocre idea with brilliant execution than a brilliant idea with mediocre execution. And it actually came from a chapter of this book that this person wrote he was trying to bust the myth that as an entrepreneur, you can't share your idea because someone could steal it. And he was basically like, there's 7 billion people on the earth. You really think you're the only person that's ever thought of this idea? No. And it's not about the idea. It's about the execution of the idea. And so people get paralyzed with what's the right idea? What's the first thing to do? Where should I start? I was doing a webinar a few months back, and we were talking about, I think, certifications. I was like, I don't care. Throw them all in a hat and pick one. Just start. Don't overthink it and feel like, oh, I got to get the right one. I got to get the first thing. Just literally, if you have 10 ideas, put them in a hat and draw one, and just start, but really work on having that brilliant execution and measure and report on what you do. Because once you do that, that traction, that ripple effect, it'll all just go from there. And then it'll start to just become more clear to you what's the next step, and then the one after that.
Awesome. Okay. Very good. And, to echo Sean Nickerson, who goes by the architect, he's one of our Viridescent co-founders, he would say, just start, just do it, just go, just try to make something happen, see if it sticks, right? And I'm known to perfection and parallelization. Just go and just make it happen, and try some stuff, right? Because even if you do it all perfect, it may not work at all, right? And then you just wasted a bunch of time. So, and the world needs you to just do stuff and try things, right? We got to come up with some solutions. So very good. All right. Last question for you, Aurora, is tell us a story, a nice story of inspiration, a story of a sustainability champion that you saw do something that motivated you to be a little bit better, to work a little bit harder, all that good stuff.
Yeah. So my green team course that ran at the college, because I also was the professor for a lot of that, not every time it ran, other people taught it as well, but I was mostly the professor. I got to see my college students start green teams and do real things. And sometimes they would be just little things. And I would just be like, oh, that is so cool. And it just what it inspired me to do is continue to believe in that course and continue to try to get that course out in front of other people and to redo the course to make it better quality and all that. But one story, gosh, there's so many, and I love these little tiny stories, but one was a person who worked in an eco hotel, in the gift shop at an eco hotel. And so it was sort of an environmentally friendly gift shop, supposedly. And she really embraced all these aspects of sustainability. And she did 3 things. One is she took 4 things that are really cool, really quick. One is she started asking people, would you be okay with a digital receipt? And she said 80% in her informal poll said yes. So she took the print paper out of the receipt printer. That is brilliant, right? She just took the paper out. You're getting an email. 2, they used to do this process where they would use paper towels to do something with the products they sold. And she showed me a picture of paper towels everywhere. She figured out how to do the process differently. And she said that they were going to save about $800 a year in paper towels. 3, she also took a straw poll from customers. They sell these little figurines that were made of plastic, and most of the customers thought that the figurines were made out of a more environmentally friendly material. And so when she talked to customers about it, and a large number changed their mind about buying that product when they found out it was made from plastic, and it amounted to about $5,000 worth of sales per week. So another great example of, I think you can justify sourcing some different materials. And then the 4th one was they had sold sunscreen, and she used to take the sunscreen out of the box and put it on the shelf, and it was in a box inside of a box, but the tube goes on the shelf. The boxes weren't even branded. She called the manufacturer, small eco-friendly sunscreen. She called the manufacturer and said, do you really need the box inside of the boxes? Can you just put them all in a box? And they did. They changed their shipping process to eliminate the extra cardboard box inside. I mean, when I'm like, I get chills. I just love those stories, because I didn't tell her to do any of those things. I just planted the seed for her to look around and start considering, well, what about this? And what about that? And giving her the confidence to ask the question and to think about new ways of doing things. That was all her. That was all her. I just gave her that little nudge, and that was all her. And that inspires me to keep finding ways that I can get this in front of more people who are willing to do those things. They just need a little nudge and a little confidence.
Wow, very nice. So I suppose I'll share a story about one of my favorite sustainability champions, which her name is the Change-maker here in the VIRIVERSE, but she goes by Aurora. I met her in person for the first time, I think, in Las Vegas at a trade show. and we were coming together to improve upon a certification called now the Events Industry Council Sustainable Event Standards, trying to make the events industry a more sustainable place. And I remember the first time that I heard her speak about how the certification needed to be improved upon. And she said, make it easier, damn it, easier for people to do, easier to get involved in, easier to take action from. And here we are 4 years later, and they are much easier and adoption has increased. So we are forever grateful to Aurora. All right.
Thank you.
So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. We will be releasing this as a video recording if you want to see the visuals and enjoy all of these wonderful smiling faces and insights from today. To get access to that, you'll sign up for our email experience, which is found at linktree/viridescent. We are also releasing our podcast tomorrow. That is an audio version of these with some fun edits and things included. And please support anybody that you've heard speak that can help, reach out to them. We'll have their contact information and things in the show notes on these conversations. So I'm really, really excited and thankful for the conversation today. This was just wonderfully fun and really, really valuable, I think. So we will kick you all out the door with a little bit of flight above beautiful Georgetown Lake in the countryside of Montana, USA, my home state. And we will catch you next time. See you later, friends.